Okay, thanks everyone, Freud and Rolf, for allowing me to present this. And thanks that we are having this bi-monthly seminar series. So it's good to understand and know how and what research we are doing here. And I welcome Brennan to our research group, and probably through this presentation, you'll know a bit more that what is there in the landscape and what kind of things we are working on. So I have gave this title a model for ensuring human-carnivore coexistence, and that is how I will speak. So it's not exactly what we have been doing, a little bit here and there, some concepts, some issues, and basically a conceptual model through which we can achieve this in this landscape. So the team members are here, and obviously there are other team members as well from ORC, from IZW, and from the ministry, and everyone who has contributed or has helped us, assisted us in several things with the project. Sorry about that. So before I start, we always have these debates around conservation of biodiversity and food security, and that is where the crux of conservation lies at some point of time. So, in the age of Anthropocene, where we have such a huge human population, and obviously with that we have gotten rich over a period of time, and that has kind of allowed us to change our diets to more meat based, and for that we have a lot of livestock around the world, and that creates a lot of issues with conservation of wildlife, because at some point of time wildlife needs space, and that space somehow is encroached upon by human interests, the sphere of development, and we'll see how they are all related to this landscape and to the coexistence model. So this is the Etosha fence in the western part in probably 2021, where Impala is trying to cross over. So the landscape is just same. It's just one linear infrastructure which divides the ungulate. And Ruin just told me that this map might not be politically correct, but what I would draw your attention is about the past and the present and the changes which have happened in the landscape. So this is a very prominent part of Southern Africa, very prominently known for the wildlife, but also for the different indigenous communities. And when the reserve was started, so I would talk only from the 19th, 20th century. So when the reserve started, it was much bigger than what is in the present context, and it almost covered, I think, uh, 80,000 square kilometers in 1907, and stretched all the way to Angola. And then in 1958, the reserve size was reduced, and today it's around 23,000 square kilometers. But this huge chunk of land was also home to indigenous communities, and somehow the reserve, while it was created, it displaced its communities from those areas. And somehow the issues of coexistence of animals, of humans, are shared in this landscape. So today, obviously, we have much smaller sizes, but nonetheless, it's one of the largest protected fenced areas in Southern Africa. And today, the landscape looks like this. So this is a 40-kilometer buffer, which we call the Greater Etosha Landscape. And if you look at it, the majority of it is the Etosha National Park. And then we have a concession area, the game reserves on the southern and the eastern side, then communal conservancies, there are 9 of them, and then we have private freehold and resettlement farms, mostly along the southern and eastern periphery. So then we also have this veterinary cordon fence, the red line here, which is not just in Namibia, but also in several areas in southern Africa. And the purpose of this line is to basically prevent disease transmission from wildlife to livestock. But obviously, when it was created, there was also consequences on the economics and on the social dimensions of people existing in this landscape. And we'll see how it creates challenges and issues around the Greater Etosha Landscape overall. So, for you, Brennan, these areas are very differently administered. So, the privately owned freehold farms you see on the southern periphery of Etosha National Park, we are here in Ongava. So, these are owned by private individuals, whereas the lands on the northern and the western part are communal lands, basically, where you have these community-based communal conservancies. So a group of people stay there as a community and as a group. But here it's more private based. And then we have so the area on the west is also a very crucial wildlife corridor which connects this national park to the Kunini region, the Skeleton Coast, and the desert lions. So this corridor goes on through communal lands and basically the human-dominated landscape, and is very important for the long-term survival of this landscape of wildlife populations. So you see that this landscape is well represented in terms of large mammalian diversity. And this whole landscape has 50% of Namibia's lions. So what we do here today is kind of going to set the tone for the entire country. And obviously this national park and areas surrounding the national park provides revenue to the national government. But not all the economic benefits are shared with the local communities and the people who stay around the national park, and that creates challenges as well. And if we look at historically how the prey populations have done in the park, if you look at a history from 1950 to 1995, from the game counts conducted in Etosha, you see there has been a decline from 1970 onwards. And if we look at the chronology of events, in 1973, Etosha National Park was completely fenced. Before that, there was migration between, I would say, Etosha, Kunini, and even the Angolan side. And wildebeest used to move, even zebra and elephants. And it was probably like a transboundary system. But from 1970s onwards, you see there has been a reduction in the overall prey numbers. And it cannot be one single cause, but obviously the fence, the creation of water holes, then the congregation of wildlife in around artificial water holes in inflated numbers created disease, and somehow the carrying capacity was regulated by all these different forces. So from 70s onwards, the uh, prey population, the wild prey population has drastically gone down. And you see here, even livestock come inside to graze because some of the parts in the fence is permeable. So good grazing grounds and dry conditions outside. So a lot of time livestock come in and graze inside. So this landscape has a gradient, as we were speaking, from the east to the west in terms of precipitation, and that creates seasonal migrations of ungulates. So in the wet season, there is a trend of animals to go and occupy the areas where we work in the Namatoni, those areas, and they are rich. But as the dry season comes, I mean, things change a bit, and then you see everything congregating around the artificial waterholes. And then there are some natural springs here and there, but they are very limited in the landscape. So all the wildlife basically responds to artificial waterholes created either inside the national park or in the game reserves or what is available in the communal lands. And yet, yeah, in the system, it's very interesting is how climate and the vegetation, they affect these interactions. So obviously, when ungulates move, herbivores move, they have influence on carnivore movements as well. And that creates interactions with the livestock, with the humans who stay outside the park. And as I said, the economic benefits from wildlife in the landscape is very limited, and that is a challenge. We, as in some aspect of the project, focuses on the northern periphery of the park, and this area has communal conservancies, village lands, uh, and the annual rainfall is a little higher. Then you have palm millet, sorghum, maize, beans, which are grown by the people, and there is livestock there. But because of the veterinary cordon fence, the sale of livestock is limited to within the community in general, and that also makes the value of livestock as a very socially, I would say, asset, kind of an asset. So generally, I mean, people are not willing to sell them just like that. I mean, if there is something which needs to be done, maybe sponsor somebody's education or a marriage or something in the community, the livestock is used in that way. And if we look at the last several years of conflicts, we would restrict us to livestock losses. There have been quite a bit, close to 4,000, and the major species which are attributed to this is spotted hyena, lion, leopards, and jackal. Obviously, these are self-reported. I mean, nobody has gone and done a DNA test to check, yes, it was a lion which killed and maybe hyenas came and scavenged there. But in general, that's the trend. And in retaliation or as a measure, lions and hyenas have also been put down. Okay, sorry. And the major strategy in the landscape is that of land sparing. So that means fence and fine. We all are aware of the fortress model of conservation, where we have a big chunk of land and that is enclosed for the values, for the wildlife values, for the biodiversity values. But outside, we have very limited interactions. And this 800-kilometer long perimeter fence around the Etosha National Park has consequences. So obviously, it especially segregates wildlife and humans. But as I said, and also from the study which Maddie is doing, we know that the fence is some kind of semi-permeable. And in addition to this, when you have rainfall, then because water is scattered, and elephants move out of the landscape of the national park. And then when they move out, they create these big holes which are used by several other wildlife, including carnivores. So right now, everything is focused on the national park and how the national park is important in the region. And probably it's time that we also think of land sharing strategies, as in how we can improve the human-dominated landscape outside the national park to maximize interactions and co-occurrence of humans and wildlife. And that would obviously need a shift in the model, in the strategy, but obviously that could be tried out. And the guild, I mean, the Greater Etosha Landscape has a diverse guild of large carnivores, lions, leopards, cheetahs, and spotted hyena. And as I said, these diverse land management types, freehold farms, communal lands, game reserves, and then livestock, human populations, the climate, the vegetation, the different animal husbandry practices, and all the cultural factors of different communities shape the interactions they have with each other. Primarily, the major issues, the negative issues which we have with carnivores is depredation on livestock. And as I said, uh, for some, the livestock is important because they use them also as a major livelihood, but for some as a social asset. So obviously, it creates problems in co-occurring with wildlife around the park. And as a result, you see that in the last several years, lions have been shot, killed by communal farmers, private farmers around the park, and the numbers are quite high. And if you look at the proportion of lions which are killed every year, that's quite a large part of the population inside the park. So obviously, human carnivore conflicts has issues not just on the numbers, but as like there is a cascading effect. Obviously, if you kill 20 lions every year, there would be issues with the demography of the population inside, the infanticide, I mean, with also uh, some studies which have been done in the last 20 years, they say that male lions have hold on to their territories for much longer periods of time because obviously you had less sub-adult males or young males to challenge them, and this is from this data that around the park, so many lions being shot when they're moving out of the landscape of the national park, and they can't obviously come back and return the best areas in Etosha. So human carnivore conflicts obviously has consequences not just for the carnivore populations but in general on the ecosystem. So if you remove lions and obviously we know only of lions, but I guess this is even true for cheetahs and spotted hyenas as well. If you look at the governance side, we have the national policy on human wildlife conflict management, and that policy recognizes the rights and development needs of local communities, while at the same time, the importance to promote biodiversity conservation. And in this policy, there is the HWC Human Wildlife Conflict Self-Reliance Scheme. So this scheme is applicable to all the communal areas, and it says that there should be some offset for the losses people have from carnivores in general, and also from wildlife. But if you look at it, look at the Greater Etosha Landscape, I mean, obviously the landscape is not just shared by communal lands, but also by private freehold farms. So somehow this policy affects the freehold farmers who stay on the southern and the eastern side of the fence because they cannot directly claim compensation or ex gratia for the losses they have from carnivores. And at times that creates unnecessary tension between the wildlife managers and the farmers. So that this is a gray area in around Etosha which probably would be addressed. And I think recently there was a conference in Windhoek which highlighted the issue of freehold farms and the issues of compensation for livestock uh, from carnivore attacks. But what we have here in Namibia, and which is obviously a global conservation model, is the CBNRM, community-based natural resource management approach, and that allows wildlife and environment and people to benefit from each other while being sharing the same resources and also providing some kind of employment. So as we talked previously, that there are around 9 communal conservancies around this place, around the national park, and that helps people being kind of stewards of wildlife, also providing employment and at times benefits through trophy hunting. Uh, and 20% of Namibia's land area is covered by this model, which is even bigger, I guess, from the protected area network. The protected area should be around 70%. So it's a very successful model if it is managed. Obviously, there are drawbacks and there are limitations of this model. There are drawbacks saying that not everyone has access to the benefits, but it's a useful model. It's a useful community-based conservation model. And we fairly know what is human-wildlife conflicts, but if you look at the levels, you would understand the differences between them. So one is very straightforward, resentment against losses. Somebody stole my bag, I'm angry about it. That's a very knee-jerk operation, yes. So the lions come and kill my livestock. I want them to be shot, or I want better measures. The other one is resentment against the government for lack of timely action and compensation for damage. So obviously, when people expect things to happen faster and they don't get response, they get frustrated. And the third one is the deep-rooted conflicts, which involves very complex processes. And obviously, the Greater Etosha landscape has all these three problems. So yes, there are issues where people feel that more things might be done. Then there are sections of the community which feel that somehow part of Etosha belong to them, and that also creates human-human conflict. So human-wildlife conflicts is somehow also very much related to human-human conflicts, as in conservationists have a very different model of biodiversity conservation. People will have very different model or perception of their well-being and their livelihoods, and that creates conflict. And if you look at the major characteristics in general, the southern, western, and the eastern periphery have higher conflicts than the northern part of the landscape. And as I said, the variation in all these different social, cultural, environmental factors create these issues. And the drivers are ecological, anthropogenic, climate related, and social related. And all of these combine to affect human wildlife interactions and conflicts in general. So, if we need to develop a coexistence model, we need to understand coexistence. And the problem with coexistence, if you look at literature, every study has framed it in a way which suits their interests, their conservation goals. It's a dynamic state, obviously, where both the interests are there, and there is some level of tolerance, but no study says that there would be an end to conflicts, because obviously, when humans and wildlife occur in a place, there would be some bits of conflicts here and there. And for that, we need to understand a system, a place, a landscape through the lens of a socio-ecological system. So humans, wildlife, they are part of it. For example, if there is drought today, maybe as in this year, obviously livestock would not get proper fodder, proper water they would need. But the same way, humans would also not get access to water they would be getting, and that would force them to use areas which is probably a congregation of wildlife. So all these factors, they shape these interactions in a different way. But ultimately, if we need to achieve coexistence, we need to look at the system through both these lenses. And that would need a good governance, which somehow is there. Coexistence, yes, at the landscape level. And then obviously, and the most important thing is to understand and reduce costs and increase the benefits of coexistence. So if you think of a conceptual model, one of the outcomes would be to reduce retaliatory killing of carnivores in the landscape. We want more lions, we want more hyenas, because yes, in spite of the charisma, they are important uh, players in the ecosystem. So if they're not there, there will be cascading effects. And then we need to increase tolerance of people, increase the resilience of communities, not just to wildlife, but also to various other environmental challenges, climatic challenges, to reduce losses, and finally to have a landscape which supports livelihoods, but also wild prey and carnivores. And what interventions can be done? One, and the most important, would be to have better coordination between different stakeholders, improved understanding of carnivore behavior, movements, everything which is related to carnivore biology, to understand livestock husbandry, herding practices, movements, and everything which happens, and how people use different measures to prevent losses. Then to involve the communities in decision making, you cannot alienate them from conservation. They are a major actor layer in conservation. And for all of us who have been involved in conservation, we understand that involving communities is a very important step. And finally, we need to have financial mechanisms which redistribute these costs and benefits. So as I said, coexistence needs local solutions, local collaborations. And the stakeholders, I think, in this landscape are private freehold farmers, communal farmers, village headmen, local residents, communal conservancy management, Etosha National Park managers, private game reserve management such as Onguma, Etosha Heights, then the local NGOs like Namibian Lion Trust, and several others who work for wildlife conservation, then the veterinary services, the traditional authorities, and least not the researchers, the people who we represent. So it needs coexistence between all these different collaborators. This is a picture from the northern part of the Landscape, where we organized a multi-stakeholder meeting kind of platform where we discussed issues of human carnivore co-occurrence. And this is from Oshivelo. So you see, uh, we have Claudine from the Etosha Ecological Institute. We have MIFT representatives from the park as well as from outside. Then we have all these farmers who found time to come and discuss. Then we have Jonathan from Okuma. So we need this kind of approaches to happen regularly so that everybody is aware of the challenges they face and they get to discuss at least the issues together. And for research, I think we need to be more interdisciplinary when we work. I mean, we need to think of the system as very diverse and need to understand that they are all interrelated. I hope, Brennan, you will be able to do some of this probably in your next 2 years, and you will understand that how they are all related to each other. And as I said, so the first and foremost human dimension, that is the most crucial part in conservation today. If we cannot manage the people, if we cannot manage how people think, it's not going to work. For example, in the United States, when the wolves were not there, there was huge hue and cry that we don't want wolves, we want a land where we can cultivate, we want safety. But as things progress, and I think Maddie will say more, we had better tolerance, better acceptance, and now I think US has a lot of bulls. I mean, this from what historic numbers, and somehow there has been some measures which have been taken, probably socially, which has allowed that to happen, as in any other part of the world as well. So we need to understand these things like the relations humans and carnivores have with each other, the traditions, the institutions, the social dimensions, the cultural values which people have. Then the costs of coexistence, some are direct, some are indirect. Then the income, then the livelihoods, I mean, what threats coexistence have for human security. Then the attitudes people have. And finally, what are the solutions of living with wildlife? So we need to understand this better. Then, as we said, livestock populations are there all across Africa and all across the world. And any protected area you look around, there are livestock. So we need to also understand how their numbers, their behavior, their movements, and not just in terms of carnivore and human conflicts, but also in terms of the disease uh, aspect, as in the wildlife livestock disease interface, which has tremendous potential in these kind of ecosystems. And finally, how they interact with the habitat and they what they have, what kind of influence they have on carnivores. And the research needs to be interdisciplinary. We need to involve veterinarians, we need to involve social scientists, we need to involve carnivore biologists when we are doing this. And to look at some of the movements we have from livestock. So these two areas are basically, one is in the northeastern periphery, one is near, that is King Nihale, close to the eastern corner of the park. And then we also have livestock along the north central part, periphery of the park. And they graze pretty close to the park boundary. And at times we have even documented them coming inside and grazing in times when water is very limited or the productivity is very low. For example, this year, King Nihale, if you look at King Nihale, the grass is already gone in the Andonic plains. And there is a lot of livestock which moved or is still probably feeding inside the park. So for our work, we selected the dominant female, the leader in the, because we wanted to know how the group, the herd is behaving. And for that, we selected these individuals from these different farms. And we could tag around 47 individuals, which includes cattle, sheep, and goats. And that combined is representing more than 500 livestock around the northern periphery of Etosha National Park. So that's quite interesting. And probably now, in the next year or so, we would know better of how they react to the change in season, as in the dry season too, they move quite a bit from the kraals, and also we know now that they don't necessarily come back at night to the kraal. They are just there in the bush even at times. So, and what we also realized is the probability of depredation by a carnivore is much higher during the day because people generally don't supervise their livestock. So these are interesting findings which we have from monitoring and interacting with farmers. And then obviously, as I said, we need to understand the animal husbandry practices. Uh, is livestock hardware available throughout, or is it not? And as I said, daytime herding is critical for reducing livestock depredation. I mean, all the managers and the conservation groups will tell us that making nice corrals, better livestock enclosures would prevent conflicts. But 70% of the conflicts happens during the day when there is nobody to supervise the livestock and the livestock is just moving on its own. So I think we need to encourage herding because what I have seen here is there is a lack of motivation for young herdmen to go and graze, to herd their livestock. And why? Because obviously they get paid very less, and that is not enough motivation for them to do it. And then there is alcohol available in the hookah shop. So at 10, 11, they're just there in the hookah shop. They're not bothered about obviously where their livestock is going. And I understand if anybody would get such small cash, they would not be motivated. So probably we need to create better motivation measures for them to herd. Maybe create a competition between all these different herders to see who has the least number of livestock lost, and then give them some incentives. And then we need to understand the environment. As we said, that in a dry arid ecosystem, rainfall and everything plays a very important role. That also has implications on productivity, on the wildlife and the livestock and the interactions. And we need to know how they drive all these interactions. So that's also crucial. And finally, yes, we need to understand the carnivores, I mean, the abundance, their demography, behavior, movements, what we have been doing, putting satellite collars on, on 14 lions and 13 hyenas. Is it correct, Maddie? 14 lions and 13 hyenas.
We have 12 hyenas collared and for lions.
Okay.
We have
okay.
one collar.
Okay. So some of the interesting things which we could see from this year-round monitoring of their movements is, in general, lions don't go out of the park. I mean, yes, we have seen that on the northeastern periphery, on the eastern periphery, near the gate where we have the Ongava Game Reserve. Probably some of you might have gone to Ongava, or maybe not. So there are lodges there, and a few of our lions go there, spend a lot of time. I don't know, probably even they might have even given birth there, lioness. And but yeah, they don't go to the livestock farms. They never cross the Etosha fence on the northern periphery, but they kind of respect the fence, but they move along the fence. On the north central as well, we got a very interesting observation, and that was from a young male. We collared somewhere in the middle of Etosha, and that male was hanging around in the north central periphery up, and from there it came straight down to Etosha Heights, all the way to the southern periphery, and again went back. So I mean, the land movements are large, but obviously there are differences, as in with respect to age, with respect to the sex, and from a year and a half of monitoring, we see that they have not crossed the fence on the communal side, but things might be different with changing weather patterns. But in the southern periphery, obviously, we have seen that movements are much higher to the freehold farmlands. And a recent paper which we published this year, where we looked at 14 years of data around the Etosha National Park, basically from collared hyenas and lions, was how the fence affects their movements, whether. So I mean, the as we saw that the major conservation strategy which Etosha has is this 824 kilometer perimeter fence. So that separates wildlife and humans and livestock and everything else. But we need to understand, is it really impactful? And if it is, how does it affect movements of carnivores? So for that, we looked at the data from three different organizations: Ongava, the Namibian Lion Trust, and the Etosha Ecological Institute. And we had lions and hyenas from Ongava, from the park, and from the areas bordering Hobbiton. And what we got was that if 100 times if a lion is near the fence, only 9 times it crosses the fence, which is good. Probably the management would be happy that yes, the fence has some kind of barrier effect. Interestingly, lions cross the fence during the cold dry season, uh, between May to August, this time of the year, and Rolf, we also looked at the data on lion mortality in Etosha in the last 40 years, and this is exactly what the data tells us. So the mortality around the park of lions happens also in this cold dry season. So there must be a trigger why they try to move out of the park. It could be related to how the wild prey is moving, it could be related to livestock, it could be related to these interactions, but that is a gray area which we need to look at. Then obviously females moved or crossed the fence more compared to the males. And hyenas had much higher, almost double the success rate for crossing the fence. And the season was very contrasting to lions. It was only during the warm wet season when it was raining. And on average, they spent 13 hours when they crossed from the park, and the very similar for hyenas. And now both of them, they moved fast near the fence, as if there was a barrier. And they were swift, they were fast when they were near the fence. But uh, I mean, they didn't really change their path orientation when they were near the fence. Hyenas, they moved very straight, as if they knew that there were holes, there were gaps. So I think because hyenas and lions, obviously, they're very different in how their biology, in their movements, in the behavior. So hyenas probably are more adapted, more flexible, and to use the human-dominated landscape, and they were very much aware of the holes in the fence. And by these holes, I refer to the holes in the study where, yeah, you will see here. So this is for the lions. So we have also identified localized hotspots where the crossings are higher. And if you look at them, you see that obviously all these lines were colored in Ongava, inside the park, and also near the habitatory fence. So that overlaps somehow with where they were colored, but still there are hotspots where they crossed quite frequently. Now that part on the west, on the near Hobbiton, that is also a hotspot of human-lion conflicts. And as I said earlier, that the area between the western part of Etosha and the Pini, they act as wildlife corridor. So lions get knocked out, and probably several other animals there, because obviously that's a high permeability path, but there also is crucial the gene flow between the desert lion population and the Etosha lion population. At some point of time, we need to think bigger picture, as in probably better wildlife friendly measures have to be there. And for hyenas, because we didn't have hyenas collared all around the park, so the hotspots of where they cross the fence is also kind of limited to where they were collared. But I guess the patterns would be very different if we could have collared all around the park. But nonetheless, this is interesting findings for the management, and I think these kind of findings could be used in strategies and actions. Finally, we need to integrate all the information we have, social, economic, environmental, into decision making, and we need to have communities involved when we are having any coexistence. Now, there is no fixed coexistence tablet or mantra. It's basically things which are there, and you stitch them together and you use them based on the pools we have. So I think this is the last slide, and thank you. Sorry for being a little long.